Hi, this is Carrie Brownstein.
This is DJ Premier.
This is Darren Aronofsky.
You got the RZA right here.
Rose McGowan.
Radiohead.
Aisha Tyler.
Tribe Called Quest.
Fred Armisen.
Prince Paul.
Javier Munoz. Seth Meyers.
Frankie Cosmos.
Flying Lotus.
Hi, we're Chaim, and you're listening to the Talkhouse Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Talkhouse Podcast. I'm Josh Modell. On this week's episode, we've got a musician at the start of her career talking with a songwriter whose 35-year-old song she recently covered after just discovering it. It's Dan Littleton and Helen Ballentine, aka Skullcrusher. Now, don't let that name fool you. Skullcrusher's music taps into elements of ambient electronic and traditional folk to create a mesmerizing stew. In other words, if it crushes your skull, it will do so gently. On her debut album under the name, last year's Quiet the Room, Ballentine deftly explores some complicated emotions via gorgeous songs and words. The two artists she's been most frequently compared to are Phoebe Bridgers and Grouper, and I think if you smush those together, that kind of makes sense. The other half of today's conversation is Dan Littleton, whose indie folk outfit Ida made some incredible records in the 90s and the aughts. But the focus of this conversation is actually Littleton's hardcore band from the 1980s, The Hated. The Hated was part of what emo scholars, does such a thing exist, consider the genre's first wave, which was led most notably by Rites of Spring. They were adjacent to the so-called Revolution Summer in 1985, though The Hated faded into history more quickly than some of their counterparts. But the scholars at the venerated Numero group recently launched a reissue series that takes a deep dive into The Hated's discography, starting with a compilation called Best Piece of Shit, Volume 4. Now, what does an 80s hardcore band have to do with an ambient folk artist currently bubbling? Well, the Numero folks had the brilliant idea of asking Skullcrusher to cover a Hated song, and once she heard Words Come Back, she was all in. Check out a little bit of the original followed by some of the cover. They are, unsurprisingly, very different from each other.
Everyone says they're strong. Everyone tries to intimidate. Were they right all along? They're all fighting, putting us down.
In this conversation, Ballentine and Littleton, who are chatting for the first time, talk about how this unusual cover version actually makes complete sense and how sometimes radically different sounds can actually come from very similar places. Dan describes the emotional teenage years that inspired the original, and Helen talks about how she layered the unusual sounds on her version. It's an inspiring love fest of sincerity and creativity, and I hope you enjoy it as much as I did.
I really was completely crushed by and moved by what you did with my song. I really lost it when I heard it. I wrote that song when I was 16,
Wow.
and it was such a tumultuous, heightened time in, foundational time in life when you kind of find your people and start to, articulate what your experience is and how you relate, what that internal world is to the sometimes real painful, harsh experience of being young and figuring shit out.
Yeah, I mean that song, it really embodies that in a visceral way for me. And I'm not, to be honest, I don't often listen to punk music. I listened to that song without knowing your music, and that was the first song that I had listened of yours. And
Wow.
when I listened to more, I was like, oh, okay, this makes sense, because I could hear kind of more of like this, like folkier elements and kind of like other inspirations. But I listened to that one first, and it's obviously sonically like very much like what I would expect like a punk song to sound. Even though it's so different from sonically the kind of music I make, that I like immediately related to. I think it is kind of what you're describing, like this sort of attempt to find the language to work through an emotion. And I think the way that music allows you to accept the limitations of language.
Yes.
And I was just so drawn to the way that the song sort of has these like repetitive, like almost pleading, like moments where you don't have to finish your sentences in a song. And I think there's something so beautiful about that. Lyrically, it really, like, I felt immediately. And then it was funny because I was like, I want to do this song. And then Ken sent me the piano demo, which I hadn't heard yet. And I was like, oh my God, like, then that obviously felt more in line with like the kind of music that I make. And I was like, okay, this makes so much sense. And I've always been drawn to like this idea of like, intensity in music, and what does that mean, and like how intensity and like aggression can be expressed in different ways.
It's really like moving to hear you talk about it, because I feel like you made the song your own, and that you found things that you like. I was talking with a friend's mother earlier today, and we were talking about how music like scents from food or the kitchen, like can they have that magic like time machine thing that just like takes you immediately to different times and places, and it's just so supercharged and so visceral, like you say. Like I heard it in your like arrangement, in the way that you had like the arpeggios kind of coming like almost like woven like this this interlocked, subtle and like really quiet, sparse thing with the piano and the guitar kind of doing those triads and just kind of like moving together. And you really found this kind of incantation aspect of the song. I really felt it so strongly. And it's just really moving to me what you did. You're singing so amazing in it. And also there is that thing, like the limitation of language, that really speaks to me on so many levels, because the other singer in the Hated, and I think like I did this too, like he was such a good lyricist, and he was like an older brother who had like cracked the code of language. And I felt like I was just kind of bleeding out whenever I wrote. I didn't feel like I could do what he could do. He seemed like a Dylan figure to me, or like a D. Boone figure to me, or somebody like it just spilled out on the page in such a like, it just felt so complex and carry so much subtlety and so much information. And we were all speaking from a certain kind of trauma, and but he would like actually kind of speak in tongues a little bit when he sang, and like I wouldn't always know. And night to night, it would change. And he would just kind of, it seemed like he would just go into a trance.
Whoa,
and things would come out like differently sometimes. And, we were like mumbling our way through the songs, and we didn't play them or work on them too much when the Hated played, especially in those early days. And even some of the words that I felt like you got like almost all the lyrics completely right in this song. And then there were ones where you just kind of found what you could translate. And it felt as true to me and feels as true to me as whatever I said. I think the line was, you say, torn out in the side of ways. And I say torn down buildings and alleyways. And the meanings are both like, one is a little more literal, mine, but yours is more what it feels like. It works.
It was an interesting experience, because initially when I was listening to it, I was like, I am not going to be able to get all
Right.
these lyrics right.
And they're not anywhere. You
They're
can't
not
find
anywhere. Yeah. I really wanted to start with the vocal. I recorded it with my friend Ben, and
Yeah.
he just like came to my mom's house and we
awesome.
recorded it like on the floor.
That's where most punk rock music actually
I was
began.
feeling very punk
Because
even
of people's moms in people's moms' basements.
Yeah, it wasn't quite like a dingy basement, but it was
Yeah.
like still, the idea like my mom's floor.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and we had like this little synth that I knew I wanted a kind of drone. Just recently I've been really interested in just like drone music and kind of like singing over drones. And so we did this. I did just like some drone chords, like kind of following the chord progression, and then sang over it. And then I was like, okay, I really want to just like try to do just one take for everything and like not do anything over again, and just kind of like let it be what it's going to be.
It's not metrically mapped out.
It's not. And even like all of that's why like the like later production that I was doing ended up being kind of fun, because I had to figure out like how, where I wanted it to sound more disjointed and where I wanted it to sound kind of like where it matches up and it comes together. Because initially we were like, whoa, this is like just sounds like a bunch of instruments playing different things, because it kind of was. I kind of improvised most of it. Like the vocal part, I didn't have a plan of like what I was going to sing. I like kind of practiced it, but like just sort of let it. But then I was like, okay, I think this is really actually capturing what the song meant to me, which was that it was like this, like listening to that song, it feels like you're experiencing it being made, like as you're listening to it, like that was the sensation that I had, especially, and like both versions of it, the piano version really gets me, because I just am always so captured by these like really intimate moments, and I feel like so connected to a person through those types of recordings. But both versions, like especially towards the end when it's just sort of like everything's kind of breaking down in this really beautiful way, and it's like so spontaneous and you feel like anything could happen.
Did you start singing and then kind of imagine layering your voice in the way that you did and kind of creating those kind of sustained harmonies? Because you seem to really know where things should be, and they link up in really beautiful ways. I'm just curious about your process with like how you approach the vocals.
I did that first take, and then I basically just used that as kind of the guide for the rest of it. So I did that first one, and then I did another one, kind of like, it's not quite a double, but it's like intentionally sort of veering.
Yep.
And that's how I like have recorded a lot of vocals with my own stuff too, or at least more recently with like newer things I've been doing. My Ableton like file looked crazy because I had no idea what was going on.
I love that.
I definitely did actually use some vocal takes. I like pitched them up super high and then like put them through like all these crazy reverbs, and it kind of just sounds like sparkles or something, like, and that's like my vocal.
See, that blows me away. So that's voices.
Yeah.
Because it's like Aurora Borealis is like off in the distance of this kind of like drone world.
I love you can do so much with them. But yeah, in terms of like the audible vocals, I think it's maybe 3, and generally like I'll do one that's like singing the words more, and then a second one where I'm like kind of deviating, and then usually a third one where I'm like just doing like ahs basically, and like doing oohs and ahs, and like usually I like to hear a lot of like reverb through my own headset, so I can like really kind of like lean in and just like kind of improvise, and then kind of edit if I need to, like take some things out.
You do processing to get the sound when you're tracking, or do you do it post? When
I'm doing those, I definitely want to hear more of the processing. It may not end up being exactly what I use, but it helps just like with knowing how to, how long to hold out a note, and gives me a little bit more flexibility.
exposure have you had with like ambient music and like experimental music composers and things like that? Like, have you dug into that stuff? Because it seems like I remember the first time that I heard that record, Discrete Music by Brian Eno, and he does whatever the Pachelbel canon, and he takes all the voices and puts them kind of like on different loops and then just plays them back, and they do that thing that you're kind of talking about, where you record, you play back something and it seems like, oh, these notes actually work wherever they hit each other,
right?
In something like Words Come Back, it seems like so simple and minimal, but you could actually, they don't have to like always be hitting at the same time, because he makes a whole new composition out of the Pachelbel canon just by delaying where you hear the parts coming in. It's like a round, but people start at the wrong note or start at a different place.
I do really like ambient music and experimental music. I'm like, to be honest, I'm just not like a huge music nerd, which is funny.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. I like don't actually like, I feel like I haven't listened to a lot of things that I like am supposed to have listened to as a musician, where people are like, oh, like I don't know, there's certain bands and albums where I'm just like, I haven't listened to that. I'm sorry.
That's so great though, because because you're not tethered to that. I think that's super kind of like punk, and a lot of like what we were trying to do, like we didn't know how to do it. Like we go see the Bad Brains, but we didn't think anybody could play like that. Like we couldn't. So you didn't go like, I mean, now I see kids and they could just like, we'll just figure out Eye Against Eye and play it back, or they'll just figure out some like incredible thing, and that's learning it. For us, we like lived with it. You saw the shows, but you didn't think like nobody could play guitar like that. Nobody could play or sing like that, And so you wouldn't even try. In a way, you try to translate like what that experience was into your own thing, and just explore, just do what you needed to do.
I feel like that's where you are able to find your own space. You don't want to be too tied to like trying to recreate something exactly. And I'm sure that like even the greatest of the greats like feel that way with, their predecessors and their idols, where they're like, I could never do that. But, it's like they kind of like found their own way. So I think that's just sort of like the process that's like will forever be how how people find their way. I listen to a lot of experimental music. I love listening to music without lyrics, even though I love lyrics so much, and I love writing lyrics, and I feel like, but I do tend to like listen to a lot of music without lyrics. I mean, I'm trying to think of like if there was anything in particular that I was like thinking about with this song. Here's a song with lyrics that I was thinking about. The song for the Siren by This Mortal Coil was like, which is also kind of like droney, and
this is really fucking amazing. This is really great. No, you have to understand, like, okay, the year that we made this recording was basically like This Mortal Coil record came out. I don't even know how to talk about it. It was like, such a gateway for so many things, because like you couldn't get access to all of this music. A lot of us like heard Big Star after we heard This Mortal Coil Kangaroo, or heard Tim Buckley after we heard Elizabeth Fraser and Cocteau Twins singing that song. And there's more. I mean, Holocaust is Big Star. Elizabeth Fraser also sings that Roy Harper song, like Another Day. So there were like all these beautiful, powerful things like happening in that 4AD aesthetic.
I know,
it was so powerful. It just like, it just destroyed us completely, or some of us. And for me, that's like, I know, like, one thing I wanted to tell you is it's so wild, because like there's music I want to give to you that
please,
Liz and I, who started Ida, like we did some projects much later on that really like had a lot of drone and had a lot of kind of like trying to similarly, work with like broken things. Like we'd use drum machines, but then we'd kind of cut them up to make them sound as broken as we wanted them to sound.
Right,
It's like, and then you'd try to play in real time along with the thing that you'd made that was a little bit broken, or you'd try to like work with the imperfect loop or something that just still felt in the electronic realm, like you're still spontaneous and making shit in the moment. Like at the beginning of the Hated, I was in high school around that time. I mean, I was 16. I was singing in a music room and I was probably just screaming and bleeding all over the walls. And this girl like knocked on the door and handed me, she said, that's really powerful what you're doing. I'm listening to you outside the door. And I think you should have this tape. And she gave me a tape of Nick Drake music. And I think it had
Nick is my he's my favorite.
He's incredible. And you couldn't find that stuff. And it was Pink Moon. And this was 1985, 86.
So I feel like that's even before it became more popular.
Oh yeah, it totally was. You couldn't find it. There's all this great fucking music that has been lost or overlooked. And like over time, that stuff it reaches a kind of critical mass. People find it who need to find it, and then they're really changed by it. And that's what that music did for me. And like Celtic music and Indian music and Southeast Asian music, like all these, you hear like a lot of those drones, you hear like a lot of those kind of ideas. And that really inspired me from an early age. And I also, even when I was doing punk stuff that was really heavy and playing really fast, aggressive music, I was always, Eric and I and Hated were always playing acoustic songs.
I really am glad that this happened because I think it actually like folds in really well with just like my project overall, which is, obviously like I'm called Skullcrusher, and I get a lot of like, people being like, your music doesn't sound like metal or like doesn't sound hardcore. But I've always been interested in this like connection between, more fast-paced, aggressive sounding music and then softer music, because I think that there really is a strong connection there, like Fairport Convention and other sort of traditional UK influenced music, which a lot of that like folds into metal and punk and like these other genres. I'm drawing from like a similar source, but it just sounds different. I mean, and it's interesting because I actually get a lot of like people who are like really into metal and they do like kind of fuck with my music, where like I think that there is kind of some sort of kinship there.
I wanted to ask you about metal for precisely those kind of reasons, because I feel like there are some real like extreme kind of experimental reaches of metal that really are interested in ambient music, really interested in drone, really interested in like folk music. And I think that like there is this kind of transcendent aspect to your work. How does magic relate to Skullcrusher? And do you like folk horror movies? And are you like, do you like weird ambient metal? And how does all this stuff like kind of work together? Because it seems like by like embracing the Skullcrusher, like you're like pointing to that. You're like, you don't want to be reduced to like any kind of like genre, and yet you're very like comfortable being in a spacious like sparse, minimal kind of soundscape,
Yeah, that actually feeds into like something I wanted to ask you as well, because like it seems like your narrative, kind of like what I've read, is that you kind of emerged somewhat in response to like the kind of punk scene at the time. And I just wanted to know like your thoughts on kind of genre and like whether you felt just how that felt at the time of when you started. Like obviously you have all of these different influences, and whether you felt kind of limited by genre classification, or if you felt like it was a way to sort of contain sort of the multitudes of like all of these other influences.
Hell yes, that is just beautiful. I am as resistant to like the kind of classifications and limitations of genre as I am to authoritarian power structures or like hierarchies or things like that. I don't look down at anybody's gateway to music, like to expression and to, you know, like whatever you need, whatever gets you there. It's like that's whatever that doorway is, that's sacred shit. It's always seemed to me like what I loved about punk rock music and my experience of it was it felt like everybody, you know, it's like that Stooges song, I Gotta Write or whatever. It's like it's like everybody's got their voice and their place. And it's not just about virtuosos. Like maybe 2 people on the planet are going to be born singing like Aretha Franklin at age, you know, 8. You know, and at the same time, it's like those are the most special things in the world when people just have those kind of gifts and they can express themselves and they're born into some kind of context in which they can really bloom. I feel like punk rock really galvanized like a sense of resistance. It helped me find people in a place in which, I mean, I grew up in a biracial family and I had like a lot of kind of post-Vietnam and 80s post-civil rights movement battles were still being kind of waged in the place where I lived. And I became kind of an easy target for violence. I just felt so isolated and so scared. And I felt like angry, like I wanted to find a way to do something with it. And I needed to find other people who felt the way that I felt, who, you know, who just saw the mirage of American late capitalist life as whatever it was and just shared a sense of like, fuck this, like, let's do something else. And then starting to write. Starting to like, you know, like I had this feeling and I wanted to just tell you because I was so moved when I heard your version of this song. Then I just really like, I kind of wish I could send your version of that song to this scared, angry, heartbroken 16-year-old kid and just like hear that like across time, there's people, there's those connections. And I found those people. So I was very fortunate in that respect. And it's like, you know, so this is kind of like a long-winded, hopefully not too diffused way of just saying, yes, I like think music is like always first and foremost about liberation and about going beyond limitations of form, rules, of structure, of where you put it. Metal kids can't listen to punk rock. People who like Joni Mitchell can't like the Bad Brains or Void, or people can't like, you know, that's Eric and I keep laughing about that because we're like, we just have to keep talking about like Joni Mitchell, Nick Drake, the big boys, Void, and like, you know, just punk rock and metal, you know, and folk music, and you know, like there's no reason that we can't just benefit from being freed from those labels. There's no reason that some kid who's like into, you know, Norwegian metal couldn't like be laid bare by like hearing Annie Briggs sing or hear, you know, Richard Thompson play guitar. It just it seems so
agree
like so
that this combination of like doing this cover was really indicative of that for me, where I was like, oh, like this, you know, because people are inevitably going to be like, oh, like their music is so different, like, you know, it's so crazy that she covered this this song that sounds so different from what she normally does, but like at the core it's actually really similar to
it's totally similar. I get it right away.
I did want to also talk about that piano demo.
Oh man,
what was the room? I'm just so curious.
Here, let me try to just give you like the version of this that that I remember. I wrote the song, I wrote the melody, the lyrics, everything kind of came out. Maybe the end part, some of the lyrics were still kind of coming into shape, and I played it to one of my best friends, who actually, for a time later, was for a short period of time, was a bass player in the Hated, Jason Fisher, and his older brother was like my other closest friend, and he wrote so many of the Hated songs. But I was hanging out with Jason in my basement, and I played him the song, and he picked up our friend's bass and just started playing along with me. That instantly just connected, and it was really meaningful to me because I was still really trying to figure out like what it was to write songs and share them with people. And I'd written really like fast, frenetic punk songs and really intimate, quiet songs that I would only play to like my best friend, or little things that I would play to my girlfriend, or things like that that were just like, I was still a little bit scared and vulnerable about them, and that song became like part of the Hated, and we basically broke up after playing 2 shows, one real show and one like basement show, and played that song live with the original group, just those once or twice, and recorded it. And we found this kind of like lightning in a bottle thing with each other. We had 2 drummers in the Hated, and I Kenny Hill and Mike Bonner, and I kind of once was trying to write about both of them, and I said to myself, I should put it somewhere. Mike Bonner, when he made a mistake, he made you cry, and Kenny Hill, when he didn't, he made you cry. Like, so it was like both of them were like kind of these almost antithetical and just totally creative, beautiful musicians, just who just were really like the key to everything we did as a band. And at this point, we did Words Come Back, and it was the last song we did with that group, the last recording. And although Colin, our bass player, has said that it was like different, that this didn't happen the way that I said it was, my experience of it was completely Mike falling on the floor at the end of the take. Like, he was so sick, he had a really bad fever. We got him home. We didn't do the rest of the take. We didn't do the rest of the songs. And it's one of these things that just moves me. It's just a real personal thing about that. Recording is like hearing him push through, and he just plays so beautifully at the end. It's so, we never, we played this one show at the New Loft in Baltimore after that, and then that version of the group was done. Here's the thing that I want to tell you. This is a long-winded way of putting it, but the piano is not really a demo. After the band broke up, we'd already recorded it as a full band song. And everybody was leaving, everything was done, and I sat in my parents' living room playing my father's piano, and just looking at kind of the end of things, like the end of this group that like meant so much to me. We ended up doing so much more together, but it didn't feel like we didn't know what was going to happen next, and that group didn't play together again until 35 years later. We just did.
The first song I wrote for my album was written on my childhood piano, which is at my mom's house. And there's something about that. I mean, there's sort of like the obvious, just sort of like, you sort of almost revert to your childhood self in some way.
Oh yeah.
Whatever, all the other hullabaloo like around being a musician, you're just like in your like really intimate zone, like closed off zone. And I mean, that's like, I think what it really comes through in that recording.
It's really a haunted place for many of us too. And so it's like, there's that, did your mother play? Did she play piano? So did you grow up with like singing, hearing music in your house? Was that like something that like happened?
Like my dad plays music. He doesn't play piano. Like the piano, I started playing piano when I was young, when I was like 5 or so. and singing and stuff. And I just love to like, make up songs and stuff like that. There's one song on my album that is audio that's pulled from a home video of me making up a song on the piano. I'm just basically like banging on the piano.
Yeah.
And I just loved that so much. I was like, this is a great song. Like, I was like, I don't know what's going on. And then we actually ended up like trying to put kind of chords over it. It was sort of an experiment.
Yeah, that piano, my father's piano, was a little bit in between. So it's like, it's somewhere around C. It's not quite there.
I was fully banging on the piano.
I'm so glad that you found this song and that you connected to it, and that you found like the hated music, and you found something in it that spoke to you. It's already like a strange enough experience to have somebody cover something that you wrote or like interpret it.
I was like nervous to talk to you because I expect that that's a strange thing. Like I haven't experienced that with my own music, but I think about it a lot, and obviously like thought about it a lot when I was asked to do a cover, because I'm just like, I don't know. Yeah, sometimes I don't know what to make of it because it's so personal. It's like taking someone's like a part of someone and kind of like enveloping it somehow. And yeah, so it means a lot to me that you liked it, or you like found something in it that was kind of touching in some way.
I totally cried when I heard it. I didn't anticipate it. But part of it was that like, also like where I'm coming from with my own music, with my own approach to like sound, and like I just love space and drones, and I want to have an expansive view of things like minimalism. Like I don't want to reduce things. I just think like you can hear when there's space in between notes, you can really hear like so many things. There's room for everybody's emotional experience to just kind of breathe. And you also hear like incredible harmonic relationships that you might not hear. I really appreciate how your songs don't require resolution to be what they are and to speak authentically. And to me, that's like something like I'm really care about. Like life is messy and things are not easily resolved or understood. My version of minimalism might include, a record like Pink Moon by Nick Drake, or a record like Blue by Joni Mitchell, as much as it would be like Blind Willie Johnson or Lamont Young or Terry Riley or something. It doesn't have to be in a genre at all. It's like the idea of one person, one instrument, one microphone is pretty stripped down.
Or even just a simple intention can, render that same kind of like minimalism.
Yes.
Or simple idea. But yeah, I totally respond to that. And I will also say that the experience of listening to your music and listening to that song and the experience of doing that cover has absolutely given me kind of more to work with in my own journey of creativity. It really did inspire me, and yeah, I'm very grateful for that experience.
I'm grateful to you. I feel like, exactly the way that you feel, what you just said is like, I feel like so appreciative of the chance to get to talk to other artists and to learn from them and to play with them and to just also be there to like participate and to witness like that creation that you're talking about. Like we can sit in a room and we can make shit together, and like that's like such a gift, like in this world, just like the possibility of communication. It feels like there's some sanity in that, and
for sure.
I want to be there for it, and I've always wanted to be there for it, and it's been one of the few things in life that I've experienced where people really do come together as a result of just sharing sound at that level, just people singing together.
Yeah.
You know, it's always been that way. If the grid fails tomorrow, people, you know, will be like banging on something and singing something until we can't do anymore. Like, it's been so like amazing to talk to you.
Yeah. Well, yeah, so nice talking, and thanks for having us on this. Yeah.
Thank you for having us. This was really beautiful. I really appreciated getting to talk with you, Helen.
Thanks for listening to the Talkhouse Podcast, and thanks to Helen Ballentine and Dan Littleton for chatting. If you liked what you heard, please follow Talkhouse on your favorite podcasting platform and check out all we've got to offer on talkhouse.com. This episode was produced by Myron Kaplan, and the Talkhouse theme is composed and performed by The Range. See you next time.